My parents spent $100,000 on my sister's wedding, then looked me in the eyes and told me I deserved nothing. And you know what? They were wrong. I didn't deserve nothing. I deserved the same love, the same support, and the same chance they gave my sister. But they had already made their choice. So I made mine. If my story means something to you, don't forget to subscribe, leave a like, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. My name is Delaney Marsh. I am 31 years old, and today I live in a beautiful house that I bought with my own money. I drive a car that no one helped me pay for. I have a good job, money in the bank, and a peaceful life that I built one step at a time. But none of that came easily. Before the house, before the savings, and before I finally found happiness, there was one wedding that changed everything. My older sister, Cassandra, had the wedding of her dreams. My parents spent $100,000 to make every detail perfect. The flowers were everywhere, the food was expensive, the music never stopped, and the guests could not stop talking about how beautiful everything looked. I was one of the bridesmaids. I spent the whole day helping everyone else. I fixed Cassandra's dress, carried boxes, welcomed guests, and smiled until my cheeks hurt. The dress I wore did not even fit properly, but I never complained because I wanted my sister to enjoy her special day. 3 days later, my parents invited me to their house. I thought they wanted to thank me for everything I had done. Instead, they changed my life. We sat around the same kitchen table where I had eaten breakfast since I was a little girl. My father looked at me with a serious face. "Delaney," he said, "you're capable. You don't need our help. Cassandra does. That's just how it is." My mother quietly nodded beside him. That was it. No apology. No explanation. Just a decision they had already made. I was 26 years old. I worked part-time, owed $40,000 in student loans, and had only $912 in my bank account. Every month was a struggle, but somehow my parents believed I needed nothing. I sat there in complete silence, trying to understand how they could spend $100,000 on one daughter while telling the other she deserved no support at all. That night, I left their house with tears in my eyes. I had no idea that walking out of that kitchen would be the first step toward building a life none of them ever expected. Looking back now, I can see that the wedding was never the real problem. It only showed what had been true for most of my life. We lived in Denton, Texas, in a simple house where money was always something my parents worried about. We were comfortable, but every dollar had a purpose. At least that was what I believed when I was young. My father worked long hours, and my mother gave piano lessons from our living room. They loved both of us, or at least they said they did, but they loved us in very different ways. Cassandra was always the center of attention. If she was upset, everyone stopped what they were doing to comfort her. If she wanted something, my parents found a way to make it happen. They treated every problem she had like it needed to be solved immediately. I learned very early that my problems could wait. I wasn't loud. I didn't argue. I didn't ask for much. I finished my homework without being reminded and stayed out of trouble. Instead of thanking me, everyone simply expected it. Being responsible became my job, not something anyone appreciated. When I was 11, Cassandra got accepted into a summer arts program. My parents happily paid for it. They talked about how important it was for her future. Around the same time, I found a science camp that I wanted to attend. I spent days reading about it. I printed the application and kept it inside my desk drawer. Every night I looked at those papers. I never showed them to my parents. Deep inside, I already knew what would happen. They would explain why the money wasn't available or why it wasn't the right time. I didn't want to hear another polite excuse, so I quietly gave up before anyone could tell me no. That summer I stayed home reading library books while Cassandra came back with stories, pictures, and new friends. As we got older, nothing really changed. Every family dinner became another conversation about Cassandra's life. Her dreams, her relationships, her plans, and her mistakes filled the room. I listened more than I spoke because there never seemed to be space for my own stories. After high school, I earned a partial scholarship to college. My parents helped during my first year, but after that they told me I needed to handle the rest myself. So I worked evenings, studied whenever I could, and signed loan papers that made my stomach hurt. For years later I graduated with a business degree and thousands of dollars in debt. Cassandra had already left community college and moved back home. Instead of asking her to figure things out, my parents renovated her bedroom to make her more comfortable. When I graduated, they handed me a greeting card with a $30 restaurant gift card inside. I smiled, hugged them both, and thanked them. It was easier than asking why things had always been so different. Not long after Cassandra turned 28, she met Trent Holloway at a neighborhood barbecue. They started dating, and everything moved quickly. 6 months later, they announced they were engaged. I liked Trent from the beginning. He was polite, respectful, and treated my sister well. Whenever we talked, he made an effort to include me in the conversation. He never acted better than anyone else, and I could see that he truly cared about Cassandra. I never blamed him for anything that happened later. The engagement changed my parents more than it changed my sister. Almost overnight, every conversation became about the wedding. My mother spent hours looking through magazines and websites for ideas. She called vendors, visited venues, and made endless lists. My father, who had never cared about decorations before, suddenly had strong opinions about flowers, music, and table settings. Whenever I called home, I barely had time to say hello before hearing another wedding update. If I tried talking about my own life, the conversation quickly returned to guest lists or wedding plans. Around that time, I had moved to Nashville for a new job. It was my first real chance to build a career. The pay wasn't amazing, but it was enough to cover my rent, groceries, student loans, and basic bills if I planned everything carefully. The work was challenging, and I enjoyed learning new things every day. One evening my manager called me into his office and offered me a promotion. It wasn't a huge raise, but it meant people noticed the effort I was putting into my job. I was proud of myself. That night I called my mother to share the news. She congratulated me, but before I could explain what the promotion meant, she interrupted me. "That's wonderful," she said. "By the way, Cassandra wants to ask if you'll be one of her bridesmaids." I already told her you'd probably say yes. For a second, I wanted to tell her I had hoped she would ask more about my job. Instead, I smiled even though she couldn't see me. "Of course," I answered. She sounded relieved, thanked me, and started talking about dress fittings before we ended the call. Over the next year, I helped whenever someone asked. I drove back to Denton on weekends to run errands, organize decorations, and help with planning. I spent hours writing invitation envelopes by hand because Cassandra wanted them to look personal. I bought a bridal shower gift even though it meant cutting back on my own spending for the month. When the wedding finally arrived, I stood beside my sister wearing the dress she had chosen. I smiled in every picture, fixed her veil before the ceremony, and made sure everything went as smoothly as possible. I wasn't jealous. I wasn't counting how much money my parents were spending. I truly wanted Cassandra to have a beautiful day. That was why what happened afterward hurt so deeply. I walked into that wedding believing everything was normal. I walked out of it about to learn that my place in the family had never been what I thought it was. The Sunday after the wedding was quiet. Most of the guests had already gone home, and the excitement was over. I stayed behind because there was still work to do. Chairs had to be returned, decorations packed away, and boxes sorted. I helped without anyone asking because that was what I had always done. That morning, my father made coffee while my mother sat at the kitchen table. She barely touched her cup. The room felt unusually quiet, and I could tell they wanted to talk about something serious. After we all sat down, my father cleared his throat. He thanked me for helping with the wedding and said they appreciated everything I had done. For a second, I thought that was all they wanted to say. Then the conversation changed. He explained that the wedding had cost much more than they had first planned. They had used a large part of their savings to make sure everything was perfect. I listened without interrupting because I thought he was only explaining why they would need to be careful with money for a while. Then he told me something I had never heard before. My grandfather had left behind some money before he passed away. I never even knew it existed. My parents had decided to give all of it to Cassandra and Trent. They wanted the newly married couple to have a down payment for their first home and a comfortable start to their marriage. I sat there quietly, trying to understand what I had just heard. My father looked at me and spoke in a calm voice. "Delaney, you've always taken care of yourself. You've always found a way. Cassandra needs more help than you do." His words were gentle, but they landed like a heavy weight. I thought about my apartment in Nashville. I thought about my student loans, my monthly bills, and the careful budget I followed every single month. Nothing about my life felt secure. Still, somehow, they believed I already had everything I needed. I looked from my father to my mother. She wouldn't meet my eyes. There was only one question I wanted answered. Did either of you ever ask me what I needed? The room became completely silent. My mother stared down at the table. My father answered after a long pause. "No. We didn't think we had to." That sentence hurt more than anything else they said. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was realizing they had made a decision about my future without ever asking me how I was doing. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I finished the last sip of my coffee, stood up, washed the cup, and placed it carefully on the drying rack. Then I walked upstairs. I packed my suitcase slowly, folded my clothes, and checked the room one last time before carrying my bag downstairs. My mother hugged me at the front door. I hugged her back because I wasn't leaving with anger. I was leaving with clarity. The drive back to Nashville felt longer than usual. Mile after mile, I kept replaying the conversation in my mind. Somewhere along the highway, I stopped wishing they had chosen differently. Instead, I started thinking about how I would build a future where I never had to wait for someone else to choose me again. I reached my apartment a little before midnight. The place was small, but every corner belonged to me. The couch had been bought secondhand after weeks of saving. The coffee table had once been sitting on the side of the road. I cleaned it, sanded it, painted it, and made it part of my home. My bookshelf was filled with books I had collected one at a time. There were 2 healthy plants by the window because taking care of them reminded me that growth happened slowly. For the first time all day, I was completely alone. I changed into comfortable clothes, made a cup of hot tea, and sat at my kitchen table. The apartment was silent except for the sound of the air conditioner. I opened my laptop. At first, I didn't know what I wanted to write. My thoughts were running in every direction. So instead of trying to explain my feelings, I started with something simple. I made 2 lists. On one side, I wrote everything my parents had ever paid for. The list was shorter than I expected. They had helped with my first year of college. They gave me a used car when I turned 18. Once in a while they had sent me a little money if something unexpected happened. Then I started the second list. That one became much longer. I wrote about every job I had worked while studying. I wrote about the student loans I signed without asking anyone to rescue me. I listed the long evenings I spent learning skills that helped me move forward at work. I remembered teaching myself how to build good credit because nobody had ever explained it to me. I watched videos late at night, read articles, made mistakes, and slowly figured it out. When I looked at both lists together, something became clear. My life had not been built by luck. It had been built one decision at a time. I opened another document and finally began writing what had been sitting inside my heart for years. The words came faster than I expected. I wrote about being the child who stayed quiet because speaking up never changed anything. I wrote about watching opportunities pass by because I believed someone else's dreams always mattered more than mine. I wrote about every long drive back to Denton to help with the wedding. I wrote about the extra expenses I never complained about even when money was tight. I admitted things I had never said out loud. There were weeks when I skipped buying things I needed because every dollar mattered. There were nights when I worried about paying bills but smiled during family phone calls so nobody would think I was struggling. Page after page filled the screen. By the time I finished, the clock showed almost 3 in the morning. I read the last paragraph once, then closed the laptop without saving it anywhere special. The letter wasn't meant to change my parents. It was meant to tell myself the truth. The next morning I woke up feeling tired, but my mind was calm. I realized I had spent years hoping my family would finally notice my worth. That hope was over. From that day on, I decided every bit of energy I had would go toward building my own future instead of waiting for someone else's approval. That decision became the strongest foundation I had ever built. The next 18 months did not change my life overnight. There were no lucky breaks or unexpected gifts. Most days looked exactly the same, and that was the point. I stopped waiting for something to rescue me and started building a future one day at a time. I worked my regular job during the week. When everyone else went home to relax, I came back to my apartment, ate a simple dinner, and opened my laptop again. I had signed up for a project management certification. The course was expensive, so I paid for it a little at a time. Some evenings I studied until my eyes hurt. Other nights I wanted to quit because I was exhausted, but I reminded myself why I had started. Every dollar mattered. I stopped buying things I didn't truly need. I cooked nearly every meal at home. I skipped weekend trips with friends because I couldn't afford them. It wasn't always fun, but I knew those choices were temporary. A coworker introduced me to a local business owner who needed help organizing financial records. I accepted the job without thinking twice. Every Saturday morning I was at my desk before sunrise. While most people were sleeping, I was checking invoices, balancing accounts, and answering emails. One client became 2. 2 became 4. I never advertised my work. People simply recommended me to someone they trusted. Months passed quietly. I rarely talked about my plans with anyone. I didn't post my progress online or tell my family what I was doing. I had spent too many years explaining myself. This time I wanted my results to speak instead. 6 months after starting the certification, I passed the final exam. The same evening I updated my resume and began applying for better jobs. The first rejection disappointed me. The second one hurt less. By the 7th rejection, I had learned not to take it personally. Then one company invited me for a phone interview. A week later they asked me to come in. A few days after that, they offered me the position. The salary was much higher than I had expected. The benefits were excellent, and for the first time I could picture a future that didn't feel like constant survival. After signing the offer, I sat alone in my car. I let myself cry for a few minutes, not because everything was suddenly perfect, because I finally believed all the hard work had been worth it. Then I drove home, made dinner, and got ready for my first day. Life kept moving. My bookkeeping work continued growing. New clients kept coming through recommendations. Before long, the extra income became a major part of my monthly budget. Instead of spending more, I made another choice. I hired an accountant to help me organize everything properly. I opened a separate business account and treated the work like a real business instead of a side job. Every month I sent larger payments toward my student loans. Watching the balance shrink became one of my favorite moments. 18 months after leaving my parents' house, my life looked completely different. Not because someone finally believed in me, because I had learned to believe in myself. For the first time, I wasn't trying to prove my worth to anyone. I was simply living a life that I had earned with my own hands, and that feeling gave me something no one could ever take away again. About a year and a half after I left my parents' house that Sunday morning, something unexpected happened. The phone started ringing. For months, my family had barely called unless it was a holiday or someone's birthday. Suddenly, I was hearing from them almost every week. At first, I thought it was just a coincidence. Then I realized everyone seemed to know that my life was going well. My Aunt Roberta had always loved talking to relatives, and news traveled through her faster than anyone else. Somehow, everyone had heard that I had a better job, that I was doing well financially, and that things were finally falling into place. One evening my mother called. She sounded cheerful and asked how work was going. We talked for a few minutes before she mentioned that she and my father wanted to take a vacation. She laughed and admitted that money was a little tight after some unexpected expenses. Then she asked how I managed to save money while traveling. I gave her a few ideas that had worked for me. I suggested booking flights early, comparing hotel prices, and planning meals ahead instead of eating out every time. She thanked me. Neither of us mentioned the conversation we had shared around the kitchen table months earlier. A week later my father called. He asked about my new position and wanted to know what kind of work I was doing now. He listened carefully while I explained my responsibilities. When I finished, he became quiet for a moment. "I'm proud of you," he said. Those were words I had wanted to hear for years. Instead of feeling happy, I felt strangely calm. I thanked him politely and changed the subject. I didn't tell him how many nights I had wished to hear those words when I was younger. A few days later Cassandra called. She sounded friendly, almost nervous. She asked if everything people were saying about my career was true. I laughed and told her things were going well. She suggested that we should get lunch together sometime. I said that sounded nice. Neither of us chose a day. After those conversations ended, I noticed something that stayed with me. No one asked what those 18 months had been like. No one asked how many hours I had worked. No one asked how many times I had failed before something finally worked. No one wondered how many nights I had studied while everyone else slept or how often I worried about money before things improved. They saw where I had arrived. They never asked about the road that got me there. That realization didn't make me angry anymore. It simply made things clear. When I had been struggling quietly, there had been very little interest in my life. Now that I looked successful, everyone wanted to reconnect. Maybe none of them meant any harm. Maybe they honestly believed they were being supportive. But intentions didn't erase patterns. For the first time, I understood that I didn't need to chase anyone's attention anymore. I could answer the phone. I could be kind. I could even enjoy the conversation. But I no longer measured my value by how often my family noticed me. My life was finally moving forward because I had stopped waiting for someone else to see what I had already learned to see in myself. That October, my parents invited the whole family to their anniversary dinner. They had hosted the same gathering every year for as long as I could remember. Aunts, uncles, cousins, close family friends, and neighbors all filled the house. My mother always used her best dishes, lit candles on the table, and cooked everyone's favorite meals. For a moment, everything felt like old times. I got ready slowly that evening. I wore a dress I had bought a few months earlier after receiving a work bonus. It wasn't the most expensive dress in the store, but buying it without worrying about the price felt like a small victory. Outside, my car was waiting in the driveway. Every payment, every insurance bill, and every repair belonged to me. Nobody had signed the papers except me. It was another quiet reminder of how much my life had changed. Before leaving, I stopped to buy flowers for my mother and a bottle of wine for dinner. When I arrived, she smiled warmly and hugged me. "I'm so glad you came," she said. "I wouldn't miss it," I replied. The evening passed peacefully. My Aunt Roberta told funny family stories that everyone had heard before, but we laughed anyway. My Uncle Fletcher started another friendly argument about football. The younger cousins ran through the backyard while the adults stayed around the table talking. Across from me sat Cassandra and Trent. Cassandra rested one hand on her stomach while she talked about the baby's room they were preparing. She described paint colors, tiny clothes, and baby furniture with so much excitement that everyone smiled. Watching her made me happy. There was no jealousy left inside me. Life had finally become big enough for both of us. After dinner, everyone started carrying dishes into the kitchen. I picked up a stack of plates and walked to the counter. My father stepped beside me while the others continued talking in the dining room. For a few seconds neither of us spoke. Then he looked at me. "Delaney," he said quietly, "I've been thinking a lot lately. I'm proud of everything you've built. You've really turned your life around." I held the plates for a moment before setting them down. His words were kind, but they weren't completely true. I looked at him and spoke as calmly as I could. "Dad, I didn't turn my life around." He looked confused. "I've always worked hard. I've always tried my best. I didn't become a different person. You just didn't see who I already was." The kitchen became very quiet. I wasn't trying to blame him. I wasn't trying to embarrass him. For once, I simply wanted him to hear the truth. "I don't want you to feel guilty," I continued. "I just need you to understand that I was never asking someone else to build my life. I only wanted my family to believe I mattered." He didn't answer right away. His eyes dropped toward the sink. For the first time in years, he didn't try to explain his decisions or defend himself. After a long silence, he took a slow breath. "You're right," he said softly. Only 2 words. No long speech. No dramatic apology. Just 2 honest words. Somehow, they meant more than I expected. We finished washing the dishes side by side. Neither of us said much after that. But for the first time in my life, the silence between us didn't feel empty. It felt truthful. And sometimes the truth, even when it comes late, is enough to begin something new. When I got home that night, I didn't turn on the television or check my phone. I changed into comfortable clothes, made another cup of tea, and sat down at the same kitchen table where so many important decisions had started. I opened my laptop and searched for a document I had not looked at in almost 2 years. It was still there. For a few seconds, I simply stared at the file name before opening it. As I began reading, I remembered exactly how I had felt the night I wrote those words. Every sentence carried the weight of someone who had been trying to stay strong for too long. I could almost picture myself sitting in that tiny apartment, writing until the early morning because it was the only way I knew how to keep my heart from breaking. Some parts made me smile. Some parts still hurt. But something had changed. The woman reading the letter was no longer the same woman who had written it. Back then, I believed my story was mostly about what I had lost. Now I understood it was also about everything I had gained. I didn't erase a single honest sentence. Instead, I began adding new ones. I wrote about passing my certification after months of studying. I wrote about finding a better job and finally feeling secure enough to breathe without worrying about every dollar. I wrote about the bookkeeping business that had slowly grown because people trusted my work. I wrote about paying down my student loans month after month and watching the numbers finally move in the right direction. Then I wrote about the anniversary dinner. I described standing in the kitchen with my father and hearing him quietly admit that I had been right all along. Those 2 words did not erase the past. But they showed me that people could sometimes face the truth, even if it took years. The last part of the letter took the longest to write. I wanted my parents to understand something important. I told them I had forgiven them. Not because I believed they had made the right choices. Not because the hurt had disappeared. I forgave them because I no longer wanted my future to carry the weight of old pain. Holding on to anger would not change my childhood. Letting it go allowed me to enjoy the life I had worked so hard to build. Then I wrote directly to both of them. I thanked them for believing I was capable, even if they had used those words in a way that hurt me. I explained that being left on my own had forced me to become stronger than I ever imagined possible. Most of all, I wanted them to know one simple thing. I was proud of the woman I had become. Not because life had been easy. Because I had refused to let disappointment decide who I would be. When I finished, I read the letter one final time. Then I printed every page. I folded them carefully, placed them inside an envelope, wrote my parents' address on the front, and sealed it. The next morning, I carried it with me when I left for work. On the corner near my apartment stood a small blue mailbox. I slipped the envelope inside without stopping. Then I walked back to my car and drove away. I didn't expect a phone call. I didn't wait for an apology. The letter had already done what it needed to do. For the first time, every word I had carried inside me was finally where it belonged. And that was enough. It has been 8 months since I mailed that letter. Life did not suddenly become perfect after that. About 2 weeks later, my mother called me. I could tell she had been crying before I answered. For the first time in my life, she spoke without making excuses. She admitted that she had taken me for granted. She said she had always believed I would be fine because I had always handled everything on my own. She apologized for not seeing how much I needed support too. I listened without interrupting. We both cried during that conversation. When the call ended, nothing had been magically fixed. We still had years of hurt between us. But for the first time, we were talking honestly instead of pretending everything was fine. A few days later, I received a letter from my father. Seeing his handwriting on the envelope brought back memories from when I was a little girl. He wrote that he had read my letter several times. He admitted that one sentence stayed in his mind every day. The part where I told him I had always been capable, but that being capable did not mean I needed less love or support. He said he had no excuse for not seeing me sooner. He also wrote that he hoped I knew he was truly proud of the woman I had become. His letter did not erase the past, but it gave us a place to begin again. Today I still live in Nashville, and I still wake up every morning grateful for the life I built. Last spring I bought my first house. The day I received the keys, I unlocked the front door and walked through every room without saying a word. The house was empty, but it already felt like home. I stood by the living room window for a long time, smiling to myself. No one had bought that house for me. Every payment came from years of work, sacrifice, and patience. Not long after that, I made my final student loan payment. When I saw the balance reach zero, I closed my laptop and simply sat there in silence. It felt lighter than I ever imagined. My bookkeeping business continues to grow every month. I hope that one day it will become my full-time career. Most importantly, I finally know something I spent years searching for. I know my own worth. It does not depend on who notices me. It does not depend on who believes in me. It belongs to me. If you have listened to my story this far, I want to leave you with one thought. Sometimes the people closest to us fail to see us. That hurts. But their mistake does not have to become your future. Keep learning. Keep working. Keep believing in yourself even on the days when nobody else does. Small steps repeated every day can completely change your life. One day you will look around and realize you are standing in a place you once believed was impossible. When that day comes, don't fill your heart with bitterness. Fill it with gratitude for the person you became while nobody was watching. Thank you for staying with me until the end of my story. If it meant something to you, please subscribe, leave a like, and share it with someone who might need this reminder today. Your future does not begin when someone finally chooses you. It begins the moment you choose yourself.